So then we come to mechanical, which is still, this is still all of our pre-start to the day, right? Things that I'm doing before the customers get into the building. So we're going to break this down into 4 areas. We're going to look at each one a little bit and also some general guidance. So in the mechanical room, I'm looking at my controller, my chemicals, my filters, and the overall environment. So when I go up to the controller, I have a notepad or something to write down any comments that I have. I see a lot of people, they walk into the filter room and they hope to remember everything. Honestly, just take a notepad or leave sticky pads by the controller. It's kind of like the waitress or waiter who doesn't write down your order. Many waiters or waitresses, they can remember what 4 different people are eating. But if you have a dietary restriction or a death allergy to nuts, you're going to feel a lot more confident in the service you're getting if you watch the person write down that Katie's allergic to peanuts. Okay? And the same thing is creating that culture in your workplace of like this value, these readings are important. It's a big deal over time if sometimes the numbers are wrong. So if I accidentally write down the wrong number today, and then you accidentally write down the wrong number tomorrow, and then Friday's correct, Saturday's correct. I work on Sunday and I get it wrong because I'm distracted and I forgot. You don't have a trend. You don't know what's actually happening in the mechanical system. You have to throw out the outliers and then you can't catch things before they happen. So we're coming into the filter room, mechanical room, we're checking the live readings. So on the controller, what is it telling me right now is happening in the water at the point of contact, right? So at the probe location. What is the live reading for pH, ORP, or chlorine? Also a good practice to check the set points. I recognize when you have a management team, it's probably you're not changing your set points very often. It's only certain people who change the range of what's acceptable, but it is good to record what are the set points that the machine is working with. So if we use a temperature analogy, because it's summer, my air conditioning is set at 18. Maybe it's running to bring down the house to 18 and it's currently 19, but it's set to 18. That helps me to understand the performance of my air conditioning system and my electric bill at the end of the month. If it's continuously at 19 all day and it's struggling to reach 18, I have that reference point of, hey, did I leave a window open? Is there something else I need to look at that's impeding the ability of the system to work? You should be noting, is the system in automatic or manual mode? So yes, typically your system will be in automatic mode, but if you have a tendency to occasionally use manual mode, or some people use manual mode, you want to get people into the habit of looking that it's in the right mode, like just a visual check, yes, it's in automatic, or no, it's in manual. Is the system feeding? So many systems will have a mechanism on the display to tell you if it's feeding. So the same way I'm using the air conditioning analogy, if it's 19 in my house and I hear the fan kick on, I can hear that the system is feeding cold air to my house to go from 19 to 18. You may hear your pump feeding in the mechanical room. You may hear whirring or you may hear clicking, but not every system does that. So just looking to see, is it feeding on the controller? Some will tell you feeding, like there's a light or a dial or a display. Other systems don't. But just to recognize, yeah, it's actually working the way it's supposed to. Are there any alarms I need to be aware of? Is there positive flow? This is a big one. So if there is no flow to the chamber, let's say somebody accidentally closed off a valve or there's a blockage, right? I like to always check that there's flow. I'm visually looking in this space to see, is the water moving? If I can't tell because the water is still or flat, I will often just open this up for a split second, open and close to see kind of the gurgle, and then it resumes, right? So I know there's water in there and there is flow to backfill whatever I quickly drained out. Takes 2 seconds. And probes, right? Probes are present, they're connected, they haven't been left overnight. Somebody was cleaning them and got distracted. You never know. Then I'm visually checking the chemicals. So, what are the levels of the reservoirs or the containers that we are using? Is the level high enough to get through the day? The feeding lines. Can I see the chemical running through the tubing? Or if I'm uncertain, can I take a second and increase the pump to demonstrate that the fluid is flowing through the tubing? Or can I put a piece of tape on the chemical reservoir and come back 4 hours later and saw that it went down? Especially if I've been working back to back days and it seems like it's still at the same level. If you have time, you can check the injection point, but that's a little bit more involved. So if you're not capable of quickly checking that the chemical is going into the pipe, leave that and try one of the other methods I've mentioned. Pumps should be plugged in, either clicking, whirring, humming if they're feeding, or, hey, the levels are okay. I'm going to come back in a few hours and make sure that they're actually running. And then, do we have enough backup supplies? So our chemical order comes in on Wednesday. Today it's Tuesday. Do we have enough to get through the day? It's been really busy. Or we had a fecal yesterday and we needed more chemical. Maybe I need to borrow some from another location, or we need to be prepared that if something goes wrong, then we need to go borrow from the other location, or we need to pay a fee to get our order early, right? Just thinking about those things. Filters, right? So I'm looking at the pressure gauges, the readings, right? What is the influent and the effluent? Valves are in the correct position. So the filters are actually open. Water is flowing into the filter as opposed to maybe somebody backwashed yesterday and forgot to restart the system. Water is flowing. So you may have a clear portion of pipe where you can see if the water is flowing, or a spyglass on the filter, just visually confirming, they're doing their jobs. Or again, you can also, some people will bleed the airline, different options, just make sure the filters are running. All this time when I'm in the filter room, I'm using my five senses to be aware of leaks, spills, drips, puddles, smells, noises, anything that should be there or shouldn't be there. A lot of things give hints before they fully break. So, for example, I've been in my house 3 years. It's a relatively new house. I changed the air filter and I noticed there's a whirring, which to me suggests that I need to change the belts in the furnace. I need to call for a service call. It's been more than 3 years now. I should get someone to look at the furnace, right? If I didn't do that task every couple months, I might not be primed to the belt, which would be an expensive breakdown if the furnace, stops at Christmas. So I'm going to pay for the fee to get the belts changed, or I'm going to watch a video and change the belts myself. So just some photos of one of your locations, right? So things I would be checking, right? Your peristaltic pump, that you see the mechanism turning, right? That you see liquid flowing. I would do a visual check, right? That I see water in the strainer basket. There's not a lot of debris. And obviously, this is all just daily checks. I'm not talking about like weekly checks, monthly checks, quarterly checks. That level of detail is going to depend on what you guys decide to do yourself versus someone else, but just things I'm visually checking coming in. Same thing here, right? I'm looking at my probes, my controllers, that things are plugged in. I'm looking at my peristaltic pump. I'm looking at my levels. Probably want to upgrade this signage. I don't think this meets the minimum for safety. Your injection points are here. So your pressure gauge, right? You can do your air bleed here. I would probably also throw this container on a pallet, like a spill kit. So if it were to leak or tip over, then checking your valves, you can either mark the positions with tape or, right on the board here with a little Sharpie. You could put, where the valve should be, mark with a little Sharpie line. This is your flow meter, right? So checking that this is spinning. So that way you can either do discharge from the probe basket, or you could see the wheel spinning. Other things on here. Yeah, so checking that the flow meter works, checking that the chemical's injecting. I think it would be pretty easy if you had the time to unscrew, but you need to be very careful that you don't unscrew it and then there's chemical shooting everywhere. right? So your exactly what you want to do in the morning will depend on your skill set, scheduled time, and organizational direction, whatever you guys decide. Another filter, right? So that I would also check that I hear the pump humming. I didn't put that on a slide, but you should hear the pump. It should be making noises. So making sure that it's on, there's no danger lights or, that it's happy, right? You're just doing a visual check. Same thing with your boilers. I'm sure initially after you changed it, you were very sensitive, like check that the boiler's working, check that the pool's warm, right? So whatever visual checks you're doing to cover whatever equipment you're worried about. This is one example of a filter room check that was from a monthly inspection we developed at one pool I worked at. This is not an everyday check, right? With that particular facility, we had a lot of issues with younger staff being motivated and parsing out the work in a way that we could ensure that it was getting done. And so lowering our expectations in terms of the quantity, but then we could be sure that what was getting done was actually accurate. So thinking about how you want things laid out in terms of, right, if somebody gets distracted, here's the exact items that they need to be, checking for, right? And then other facilities I've seen, they do maps or diagrams or photos or it's a little bit of work investing in the creation of these documents, but it will save time in the long run in terms of people other than management being able to do some of these tasks, right? Like defining good working order, I would probably put more criteria if a lifeguard is checking it, right? Like, water flows to the floor and it's not cold or what that looks like. This is the bottom half of the same page. You could incorporate some of these in your daily checks in terms of like, a manager might know what good lighting is, no lights out. But if you were training a newer person, maybe they wouldn't know that if a light is out, that is a specific concern because it's LED lighting. They should never go out, right? Or same thing with a garbage, right? Maybe a teenage boy who has a different standard of cleanliness, there's a little bit of room in the garbage. So for him, that's okay. But for your level of customers, you want the garbage to be like below the vision line, right? Whatever that looks like. Corrective action or spaces for comments, I find is also very helpful because you may have individuals notice things that you don't notice or that don't work for them, but work for you, that you can have the opportunity for comments. Okay, last section is mechanical. We're still in mechanical, right? So you can add other items to these categories. I tried to keep it very superficial, what I actually would check. So when I walk into the building, does it feel warm? Does it feel moist, right? Does it feel clean? Do I have any concerns about the air temperature or the air quality? And then miscellaneous items that are starting to get more to administrative and less safety, but practical, right? If the Wi Fi's out and your phones are VoIP, that's a problem, right? Is the computer, has it been stolen, right? Is there, the printer is out of paper or, just very basic things for running a pool. Your accessibility lift, charging different items or equipment that you need. Are there any staff room specific tasks like put on the coffee or wash the towels, dry the towels, whatever that looks like at your facility. Then we finally get to the public spaces, right? And this may be you doing this may be someone else, but even though your customer service level matters for you guys as a private swim school, it's still after the pool operations, right? So customer facing areas, reception, bathrooms, showers, changing stalls, benches and boots, viewing areas, lockers. I know you're already thinking about all these things with COVID, traffic patterns, spacing, adjusting. So I'm sure you've considered all these things, but it is part of the operational priorities in my mind. It's just further down the list. How am I thinking about it, right? Is it clean? Is it safe? Is it set up? Like, do the chairs need to be unstacked? Do the furniture need to be pushed back out into the center of the room because we mopped or we vacuumed? Do the mats need to be shaken out because it's salty winter season? What do we have to do now versus what can the front desk person do on a break once we get 15 minutes into that first lesson? What does that look like? And so then we get to your checklist. So you have the opening and the closing. I would encourage you guys to think about a midday check, especially with COVID, especially with changing services like like ramping back up, right? So speaking to what I just said, codifying who does what does that look like? I'm definitely a huge fan of a midday check. So when I worked in municipal pools and we had swims from 6 a.m. to 1 p.m., and then usually 1 to 3 was quiet if we didn't have schools. That's when staff would take their breaks, eat their lunch, we would tidy up, clean, do admin. It was like a reset for 3 p.m. to close. Now, you may not want to have a closure period for revenue reasons, and that's fine, but then you should have a staff member who comes early or stays late or has a blocked midday check. Really start thinking about that scheduling of who's going to do it. And it's not always good for it to be a hot potato. It can be beneficial to have one person that has that job or has that role to make sure it's done correctly. Because often, if it's a hot potato, like, sorry, Susie, I need you to eat your lunch really quick because I need you to do these tasks. Her heart is not going to be in it, right? It's yes, she's being paid, she's at work, but if you actually want the service level to match the product, you may just want to have, Andrew who's coming in to teach. He's not wet yet, he's not cold, he's not hungry. He's able to go do these things before teaching, or whomever, or he covers the desk and the desk person does it. So here's an example of one of the documents I can send you. This is one where we split it up by day of the week. And here you can see we got really granular for that. I think it's really helpful. It's not spoon feeding if it's helpful. Because what about if nobody's checked off toilet paper in the men's, then they maybe meant to go change it, but then there was an emergency and nobody did. Right? So you can break it up however you'd like. We did it where each day was slightly different. And obviously you could make it seasonal too. So this is what we do in the summer. This is what we do in the winter. And once you have a document like this created, I know it's a lot of work to create it, but then it becomes a quick tweak, right? Like, let's just change out these items and it's a living, breathing document. Here's the lower portion. Right, this is a mixture, you'll notice, because at this facility we had lifeguards did everything. We were in a rural facility. So lifeguards, as they became seniors, they helped with pool operations. We also did cleaning. We also did teaching and guarding. We also did the front desk. So that's why it was very blended. You may have a management sheet and a lifeguard sheet or a swim instructor sheet. You can parse it however you'd like, but for us it made sense to have everything in one place because we were all equal. There was only like 8 of us total. And this speaks to chemicals. The AK color is the controller. These are the flocking, like the supplemental chemicals. This is the automation, right? So what the machine reads, what you actually test, right? This was customized after several months of trying to figure out what we needed. Last couple slides here. So staffing is part of your operational priorities, right? So speaking to what I said earlier, where customers and ourselves were coming to the pool from a different place mentally from the last year. This is something that I would always recommend, not just COVID, but especially with COVID, being aware that things are going to switch more quickly. In the past, maybe I would have like a 17-year-old lifeguard who I would notice over the course of several weeks was having difficulties at school or having difficulties with a relationship. With our staff and our clients right now, I think we're going to see things switch a lot more quickly because people have that trauma and they're going to be burnt out and they're not going to have the patience or the tolerance. So really thinking like when Susie comes in, I'm asking her how she's doing. I'm getting enough words out of her to get a sense if she slept, if she's, hydrated, she's ready to work, if I have any concerns, what that looks like, and physically prepared to work. Thinking to the day. So what are some challenges? I have Mrs. Jones's kids coming at 2 p.m. She's a very high maintenance client. I have Andrew working with Mrs. Jones. Andrew's had a sporadic attendance record during COVID. I need to be prepared with my bathing suit, like out of the bag in case I need to run and change. Thinking about those things, I know you do this already, but remembering that you need to anticipate what's happening today, where are the potential problems, what would I do if this happens, who would I swap, how would that work? And then also considering with Delta, if we do get into a situation where you have a confirmed exposure. So we're starting to see that, yes, certain vaccines are providing good protection against some variants, but we are also seeing people get sick with the variant despite vaccine status or despite other conditions. So I know you'll have your COVID plans ready in terms of what the government requires, but literally also thinking through practically as an organization, what are we going to do? What's the minimum we're going to do? What's the maximum we're going to do? Right? What does that look like? And having that plan quasi set up because it's probably not an if, it's probably a when. Right. So I was reading in magazine a few days ago, I guess last week, the Duchess of Cambridge, right, Kate Middleton, she was in contact with somebody at Wimbledon who has COVID, right? So then it's like, okay, who did she see? How do we stop this, right? And that's somebody who had just been at multiple different events, right? So contact tracing, basically.